I'm drinking more loose leaf tea. Part 3. I'm waiting for it to react. Okay, there we go. 11. When Saskia was willing to mind, which was most of the time, she was as biddable as any other village child. When she had decided to balk, nothing could move her. Anwara might scold, Yano might thunder, and even raise his great blacksmith's hand, though he could never bring himself to strike her. She remained passive, her strange eyes mirror dark, and her pointed face sad. But once her household tasks were done, she waited only till Anwara glanced away, then she was gone. Short of trying her to the doorpost, they could no longer keep her off the moor. Let her be, daughter, old Bess counseled, stopping by the cottage one day to find Anwara in frustrated tears. I have told you she will come to no harm on the moor. She should do as she's bid, cried Anwara. She does so in everything but this. Old Bess watched as Anwara dashed a hand across her eyes and angrily blew her nose. It is the moor itself you fear, is it not? When Anwara did not answer, she took off her shawl, laid her little gift of sweet Sicily on the table, and said coaxingly, Come, brew us a cup and sit a while, and calm yourself. Saskia will come back, but she cannot help going, and you'd best make your peace with it. Anwara's shoulders drooped, and she did not answer, only pushed the kettle over the fire on its iron arm, and crumbled dried mint into a pot. They did not mention the matter again. However, after that day she did not forbid Saskia to go where she would, or complain to Yano. Yano was glad to let the subject drop, to turn his mind back to his smithing, which he knew something about, and tell himself the two of them must have worked it out somehow. It was a vast relief for Saskia. Her life had already begun to be two lives. The humdrum one in the village, made irksome by the bedevilment of the other children, though brightened by old Bess and the books, and the other, truant's life, high among the mists and the bogs and wild, stony reaches of the moor. She was never sure which part of the moor she liked best, the steep, broom-gilded, heather-shadowed slopes always solid underfoot, or the sometimes steeper bogs spiced with danger. After a dry spell, a bog was merely a mat of thready, springy moss that you could bound across as if your feet had spread little wings. In wet weather, which was scarier but exciting, you had to pick your way across a bog, wary of the tall tussocks of sedge and cotton grass that marked the wettest spots, where a misstep could set you sinking and struggling into the sucking depths. But the glimmering little tracks she often saw there always traced a safe pathway, though she was careful never to put a foot directly on that glimmer. The tracks crisscrossed the dry moor, too. Now and then she fancied she saw something or someone scurrying along them, too small to be a man, too more skilled to be a lost child, a shape moving too erratically to focus on. But if she managed a closer look, it always turned out to be a moorhen, after all, or the flitting shadow of a raven, wheeling overhead, or nothing but fancy. She had soon found Tam and the goats again, by climbing as high as she could and listening for the mellow fluttering sound of shepherd's pipes and the tinkle of Dibble's bell. So you've come back at last, Tam exclaimed as the nurse showed herself, a bit hesitantly, around the shoulder of the big rock he was leaning against. I reckoned you'd changed your mind and didn't like us after all. His eyes widened as she stepped into full view. What's that you've got? It's never bagpipes. Can you play 'em? I can, Saskia told him, grinning at his surprise when tucking the bag under her arm. Will we play together? We will, but this reed's got too soft a voice. I'd best use me wee screamer. Tam tucked away his long reed pipe and got out a small one hollowed from a finger-thick twig. So give us a tune. I'll find if I can tootle along o' you. Saskia huffed and puffed the bag full, turning hot-faced with the effort, gave it a little clout with her fist that produced its preliminary coughing wail, then launched into one of the liveliest of her strange little tunes. Tam listened a moment, his mouth ajar, once lifted his little pipe to his lips, but then lowered it again and sat bemused till she'd finished. "I'll never learn that in tootling along," he told her. "Who taught it to you? Hisner the Elf King?" "Nobody taught me," Saskia retorted, her bright day suddenly dimming. "You making game of me?" "I'm not, then," he said promptly. "That's a magic music if I ever heard any. And I suspicion I have heard some now and again, out here on this moor." He looked away, over the waste of rocks and heather and towering cloud pillars, his 3 goats nibbling in the foreground, and far behind them a grey, narrow curtain of rain brushing the horizon. Following his gaze, Saskia could see only the familiar playground, the one place where she need not guard her tongue and mind her ways. Perhaps that was magic in a way, but not in the way Tam meant. She said, "You tootle a bit then, and I'll see if I can follow." Tam was willing, and after a few blunderings, Saskia caught his rhythm and began to play along over and under his little pipe's shrill melody like a bramble vine twining a sapling. Next, her bagpipes became a tree, a sonorous, solemn drone song with the chanter wailing, and Tam twined it with brambly whistlings. Well pleased with themselves, they stopped to get their breath and follow the goats over a rise. From here they could see, nestled in the next hollow, the tinker's little two-wheeled cart with its raggedy hood, and next to it a reed hut of the sort shepherds build, with an ox skin roofing the space between. The pony grazed at its tether a little distance away, the old dog drowsed by a cart-wheel. "Bruman is there?" asked Saskia. "He is making the shoes and boots and leathern things?" "Sleeping it off, more likely." Saskia rolled her eyes at him. Old Bess had no good word for drunkards, including Yano's dead pipe-playing da, nor did Anwara. Saskia had never seen one, that she knew of, only the village men getting merry on a feast day, or coming unsteadily home in the dusk from Sorcha the alewives up near the mill. Tam laughed at her, showing the little gap at the side of his grin. Well, that's Bruman. He mended a leathern bucket for an old fisher t'other day, and got paid in muxta. So what else could he do but set to drink it up? He's been worse lately, Tam added, the smile fading. It's his leg, I reckon. Pains him something fierce nowadays. So he drinks himself blind. One day he'll stumble into a bog, and that's the last anybody'll see of him. I told him so the other day. Right to his face I did. What'd he say? Asked Saskia, wide-eyed. He just growled at me. Tam glanced away, shrugging. Said the bog sounded right restful. Said he'd make shift to find one and step in, aye sure. Then what'd me and the pony and goat's old warrior do with ourselves, I wonder? Saskia had no answer, but he did not seem to expect one. What's he look like, Bruman? She asked, finding her mental image becoming too odd to be convincing. Just a whiskery, rough-looking fellow, said Tam in surprise. Limps, you know, leans on the crutch he made for himself. I'll show you. Tomorrow next day he'll be back in his senses. Come up and I'll take you to see him. But a day or two later, when Saskia climbed to the goat's grazing place, she had a different question on her mind. She and Tam piped a few tunes together. Then the mist turned to rain and they had to pull up their hoods and huddle in the lee of an outcrop until it stopped. It seemed a good time to talk. You know a fisherman called Virgil? She asked Tam. Tam glanced at her oddly. Not rightly, no. Not myself, but Bruman does a job for him, now and again. 'Twas Virgil paid I'm in amongst last week. He paused, scanning her face. Of course I've heard tell of him, haven't you? Instead of answering, she asked another question. What have you heard tell of him? Same as you, likely. He's a lack-witted old hermit, like. They do say he turned up out of nowhere one winter long ago, wandering the moor without even a cloak on. Folks say he'd likely fullered the fool's fire, lost his way. Never been right in his head since. Harmless, though. Tam shrugged, added curiously, What'd you put in mind of him, then? I don't know, Saskia murmured. She did know well enough, but just now she was busy comparing what Tam had told her with the little she'd already heard. He came to our cottage once when I was piping. Stood there gaping at me, then took off down the street like the bucka were after him. But yesterday midday Yano had put a cloth-wrapped packet on the table in front of Saskia and said it was Virgil's fishhooks, and she was to take them to get his coppers for the work. She jumped up quickly, but Anwara frowned at him and added, If you're not afeard? Whatever would I be afeard of? She'd asked blankly. So then she'd gone a long walk through the woods to Moorwater, and around the reedy shore to Virgil's little stone house in Cowbyre, set back amongst the dunes on the other side. She'd been glad to go, curious about the Nauticans, resolved to ask him straight out if he'd been hexed. But she'd never got next nor nigh of him. The dog came out and barked at her before she'd set foot in his dooryard, and instead of hushing it, he just yelled over his racket for her to put the fishhooks in the mug beside the manger and find the coppers there. On her way to the byre she looked back to find him out of his door, holding the dog now but staring after her. Indeed, he waved her on, shaking his shaggy head and bellowing, "No, no, I want nothing to do with the likes of you." Now here was Tam's story sounding quite different from Anwar's. "Will we go to see Bruman today?" she asked after a moment. Tam gave her his teasing grin, made somehow jauntier by the little gap. "He knows nothing more of the fishermen than I do. I never said didn't need to. Come along, he's as sober as he ever gets. Ask him all you've a mind to. He loves to talk when he's in the mood." Bruman was a whiskery, rough-looking fellow, as Tam had told her, and at first seemed nothing more. He sat hunched at his workbench under the tattered ox hide stretched between cart hood and hut thatch, a big-shouldered, thin-shanked, middle-aged man in a worn leathern tunic, with his left leg extended stiffly before him. Gray streaked his wiry hair, and a deep furrow carved each cheek, but there was a vigor in his bloodshot glance he threw at Saskia as they approached. His hands paused on the soft boot he was patching, then went on of themselves as his eyes lingered on Saskia. What he thought of her he could not tell. Her own gaze kept returning to the crutch lying beside him, a stout limb of beech fitted with a leather-padded crosspiece, both dark with use. The old dog warrior struggled up from his place by the cart-wheel and padded stiffly forward to greet and sniff them both. Tam ruffled the dog's ears, and it sat down heavily on his foot. "I brought me friend from the village," he told Bruman. "Her name's Saskia." "Yana the smith's young one," Bruman said in a husky, rattly voice that sounded as if mice had been at it. He cleared his throat, harumphed a time or two. "Heard of you, I have." "Aye, well, she's heard of you, too." "And nothing good, I'll wager," Tam retorted. "Tell her what you know of that fisherman you had the mucksta off of, if you know more than I do." The bloodshot eyes turned to him briefly. "And what do you know?" "Not much. Followed the bog lights, did he? And turned up witless?" Instead of answering, Bruman fell to studying the bagpipes Saskia carried slung across her back. "Can you play those proper?" he asked her. "I can. Let's hear you." No need to urge. Saskia swung the instrument into position and piped one of the tunes Tam had taught her, following it with an eerie one of her own. Bruman's good foot was tapping before she finished, and his whiskery face split in a grin. He said suddenly, "They'll have him off you." Startling at his change of tone, it had turned faintly malicious like a smile. She could only stare at him. "The pipes," he said. "Them ones'll have 'em, sure, if you don't take care. Steal 'em the minute your head's turned. Oh, they're tricky, they are. Tricked old Virgil, didn't they?" "Aye, he told me once. One of them moor folk creatures it was. Just tricked 'em blind." "How'd they do it?" asked Saskia, wide-eyed. Bruman was silent a long moment, his face unreadable and his thoughts perhaps straying elsewhere, for all she could tell. "He'd never say," he answered finally. "Might be a lie. I've heerd tell 'twas Virgil tricked the fairy, and the creature paid him out for it by making him queer in the head. No sayin' which is the truth of it." He paused again, scratched a stubborn cheek, and abruptly dismissed the subject. "You, boy, fetch me out the ale-jug from the hut, then get back to your goats." He bent his head to his boot-mending. Plainly the talking mood had passed. Tam shrugged and grinned at Saskia, fetched the ale-jug. They left, pulling up their hoods, and as the gentle rain began again. Descending the slopes to Torskal, a short while later, Saskia mulled over the 3 tales she'd heard about the fishermen, none much like the others except they all blamed some eldritch creature. She decided to ask old Bess, and old Bess's tale, while different from the rest, including more fact than fancy, yet had to do with an unearthly creature and some unknown happening on the moor. "It must be 15 years ago, child, when he first came to Torskal, maybe more. Late afternoon, half the village was coming and going in the street, and here came this stranger down out of the moor, all ragged and haggard, half-draught already, I don't doubt, and staring into one face after another, asking for his kin. But those he had asked after were long dead, grandparents and great-grandparents of the one middle-aged woman who remembered their names, and even she knew of no Virgil in her family except a lost great-uncle, a fisherman, who'd left the village 55 years before, and never did come home. The family'd always assumed he was drowned in moor water or maybe lost at sea. "Nay, not at sea," he'd said then, staring around in a way to give a body a fright. "Not in moor water. In the mound it was, where I was lost. She coaxed me into the mound." Everybody had heard of humans beguiled by the folk and enticed away into their secret home. Nobody had ever personally known such a human or believed they saw one in this wild-eyed old man, Most crossed themselves to be on the safe side, and hustled their children into the house, who soon gave up asking, poor fellow, old Bess finished, went off to more water, and built his hut, started fishing, and turned his back on the village, got more lone and odd the more year passed. Saskia was silent, her skin deliciously crawling. A phrase echoed somewhere in the depths of her mind. Time runs different in the mound. Someone had said that once. She could almost hear the voice, but it could have been anybody. She had heard numberless stories about the folk and their tricks and their hidden homeland somewhere inside the hills. She did not ask old Bess if she believed this one. It did not occur to her to ask herself. Strange things happened, everyone knew they did, and some were past explaining. 12. For Saskia, there were strangenesses even about the moor. Elusive shreds of half-remembered stories or half-imagined dreams swirled unexpectedly around certain rocks and berry bushes, crept across the coarse grasses, or clung in hollows very like the wisps of fog that forever came and went. She picked her mental way around them as automatically she picked her way through a bog, wary of bringing one into clearer focus. Occasionally one tricked her, as in the matter of the sheep wool. By mid-June, shearing was nearly done, but there were still gleanings to be had on the high slopes where flocks, now nibbling other hillsides tidy, had grazed in the winter. Saskia absently plucking tufts of wool off the brambles as she wandered homeward one day. Gathering it seemed as familiar as a chore as twig collecting. She brought Anwar a good bundle of wool, along with a handful of spider webs she had chanced upon, but Anwara's reaction was disconcerting. "What's this, then?" "Why, you know I never bother with these tattered, stickery bits when we've got good fleeces." Well, it's all right, child," she added hastily after a glance at Saskia. "They'll do for scrubbing pads." Then as she caught sight of the wad of cobwebs Saskia held out, "Lord a mercy! And what is that for, pray?" For thread, for cloth, for strong thin cord, thought Saskia, but she jammed the wad back in her pocket and said quickly, "I brought it for the grandma. It stops bleeding and such." And that was all. Old Bess always kept a supply of web in a small wooden box on a shelf above her hearth. "For sure that's why I brought it," Saskia told herself. "Nobody spins cobweb." Yet she knew the feel of fish line twisted out of cobweb, and she could almost see the cloth finer, stronger than any woven wool or flax, silvery, shimmering, airy as the skin of a bubble. Surely she had seen it somewhere, sometime, and had gleaned wool too. The subject encountered a closed door in her mind. Old Bess was glad to get to the web. Old Bess welcomed all her haphazard offerings, but Saskia soon learned what to search for to add to the old woman's store of healing simples. Buckbean, now in rosy white fringed bloom throughout the bogs, bearberry, and certain mosses, and in the highlands she gathered stonecrop with its fat leaves and yellow stars, which old Bess liked for supper, mixed with dandelion greens and a little oil and apple vinegar. Saskia, once she had tasted this odd dish, liked it too. She did not mind being odd in the same way as old Bess was. She knew she was growing ever odder in the eyes of the village. "The Bretla, Jenkins's sister, she sasses me as bad as he does, and she's a whole year younger than me," she told Tam indignantly one day as they dawdled along after the goats. "What's she say, then?" "That my toes are too long, and I've got devil's eyes. Says I'm not to look at her." Saskia spread out a hand and stared at it crossly. "Fingers, too," she added. "Let's see yours." Tam showed her a sturdy sun-browned hand, fingers longish and supple as if gruddy and ragged and nailed, but not as long as her fingers. It was easy enough to see. "Don't heed what they say," he scoffed, thrusting his hand in his pocket. "They're ninnies, the most of 'em. That Robin, he's even too noddle-headed to know about the Kingstown. Told me I'd made it up." He grinned at her sideways, showing the little gap, and she felt her lips curving in reluctant response, though she turned them down again at once. "Well enough for you to say, 'Don't heed them,'" she pointed out. "I'm feared not to, lest they do me a mischief." "What mischief, then?" "Any they can. That Herwick, Catilla's big lad, he pushed me into the woods pond the other day, or would have hadn't I skipped out of the way right lively. It's deep, that pond." She shivered, not quite able to seem casual. It had been a shock, a fright, and had led to a scary discovery. Nobody had tried to save her, not one. They had stood and watched. She had saved herself. "You can't swim?" Tam asked her. "I don't know." She forced the quaver out of her voice. "Leastways, I never tried, and I didn't fancy learning that way. I'd 'a' drowned, I think." "How'd you get out, then?" Never rightly went in, just dipped my skirts like. There was a branch hanging over. Saskia let the rest trail into an evasive shrug. It hadn't really been close enough to grab, that branch. She'd had to leap for it. Fly, like. It had almost felt like flying, and her swift scramble into the higher branches had felt like running. Effortless, sure, unhesitating, feet and hands working without conscious thought. Only when she sat perched in a safe crotch, heart pounding, peering down at the gaping upturned faces of Robin and Bretla and Brandon, Jenkins and Morgan and Eluna and the rest, did she realize she'd shown herself a good deal odder than before. She hadn't climbed a tree that way in years with anybody watching. She'd been careful not to. Too late now to pretend she couldn't do it, that she was just like them. She wasn't. She couldn't understand the things they did. She wasn't like anybody she knew, even Tam. Don't heed him, Tam said again, but he was watching her face and he sounded angry. Howsomever, don't turn your back on him either. Stupid mother and clodpoles, here, sit down. I'll show you a new trick I've been working at. He pushed her gently to a seat and produced from his leathern pouch 5 smooth creek stones, the size of walnuts, a black one, a white, a brown. The 2 he had colored, one with red earth, the other with a golden, transparent yellow he must have begged when somebody was washing a beehive to make bed. They were pretty there in his cupped hands like some kind of strange bird's eggs, and Saskia could not help smiling. That's better, Tam said. Now watch. See if you can say which color I'll come up with next. He began to juggle, slowly, so she could follow the movements, tossing the stones in a lazy oval in the air, catching them again in reverse order. It was easy. She was soon naming their colors shrilly as they came thinking back into his hand. But then the lazy oval gradually speeded into a whirl, and once he seemed to have found 3 white stones somewhere in the air. By the time he caught them all in his pouch and buckled its flap, Saskia was shrieking with delight. Tam gave a pleased grin, swaggered a bit, and they thought no more that day of the village children. But it was hard for Saskia to forget them for long, for the tasks they shared, she could not avoid them, nor they her, until she could escape to the moor. The daily taunts and snubs and pinpricks of malice, ever repeated, freaky, odd. Tam got angrier about it than she did. Don't you hate him for treating you like that? He demanded one day when she'd appeared with a skinned and bloody forearm, souvenir of a push she hadn't seen coming, which had thrust her painfully against the pasture's stone wall. She was pressing a bit of web over the place, and only shrugged. She didn't really understand about hate. She often felt scally, sometimes sore and lonely, mostly bored to screaming with their tireless, stupid pestering. But hate? What's it feel like, hate? She asked him after a moment. It never was all right to ask Tam things like that. He never gaped at her for not knowing. But this time he didn't seem to know how to answer. Well, mean-like. You want to hurt somebody a purpose, or plan out something wicked that'll make 'em sorry. Can't rightly explain it, I guess. He hesitated, then his face cleared. Here, I've got it. It's all the way at the other end of your feelings from love. Clean upside down from love. Saskia studied him a minute. Hate sounded a lot like the way they acted, not any way she felt. As for love, was it like wanting to do something for Anwara because of the bagpipes? Likely she didn't understand about love either. It was just one of the ways she was different from everybody else. Tam alone never made her feel it. Didn't even seem to care. What's the good thing, just like everything else, he said. What's the good being just like everybody else, he'd say. Here, you know what the divil did last night? And he'd be off on a tale of the black goat's ways that made them both forget hers. But today he was inclined to brood, to take her bloodied arm more seriously than she did. A body'd think their mums and dads would teach 'em better, he grumbled. I suppose they never pull these pranks where the grown-ups can see, though. Sometimes they do, Saskia admitted, thinking of the hair-pulling Morgan and Eluna got up to, screaming with fake laughter and saying Saskia's hair was only a sheep's wool glued on her head. Ebba only watched sideways with an odd, twitching little smile, till Saskia herself fought free of him. Then she told her twins mildly not to tease, and Saskia crossly to mend her ways, or Yada would hear how she kicked and pinched. I think mums and dads don't mind, Saskia told Tam bluntly. Well, I mind, Tam growled, but there was nothing he could do about it either. The goats had found a patch of thorn bush, and were happily scratching their necks and even standing on hind legs to reach the tenderest twigs. It seemed a good time to rest a bit and look out over the wild, high world. Tam dropped down on a sun-warmed stone, leaned his stick against it, fished out his long reed pipe, and began to play a mellow, fluttering little tune. Saskia sat down near him. She had not brought her bagpipes, having fled straight from the pasture in her collision with the wall, but she was content to listen and let the music mend the jagged edges of the morning. In truth, the morning was half gone, as she saw by the squinting glance at the sun. She would be late with the firewood, with the churning, with the loads of bracken needed to underlie the sacks of new-cut hay and keep them dry and mouse-free. Late with everything, as she was sure to get scoldings from Anwara and roarings from Yano, who was always grouchy when he had to quit smithing to go haying, and no chance to slip away to old Bess in the books. Saskia sighed, felt the day settle heavily upon her. Go now to her tasks, and the children, or stay and be late and scolded. It was no decision, really. She would stay. You a-hungered? Tam asked, putting his flute away. I've some cheese in my pouch, and yon's a moorberry bush. I'll pick us some in me cap. Saskia sprang up to help. When the cap was full of berries, she produced her own midday bite. 2 of Anwara's flat loaves from her apron pocket, and swapped Tam one for a chunk of his tough yellow cheese. They returned to their stones, and sat companionably eating, Tam telling one of his tales about the king's town, which she never knew whether to believe or not. She was half listening, half watching one of the scampering small figures, or shadows, or whatever they were, that she glimpsed occasionally on the flickering paths. This one was not following a path, but lurking just yonder behind the moorberry bush. She saw a flash of red among the leaves. Next instant, a small red-capped figure darted swift as a lizard up onto the rock beside Tam. And there it sat, in plain sight, scarce an arm's length away, not quite plain sight. It was like looking into clear water. The far edge of the rock and the clump of broom behind were both waveringly visible through its shape. But she could see the shape too, and it was no shadow, no mere fancy. It was a little man. He was no taller than the miller's little Octo, who was only 6, and he had a straggly beard, and grizzled pale hair showed through a hole in his scarlet cap. The longer she stared, the plainer she saw him, but he seemed not to know it. He was watching Tam, and whenever Tam set his cheese down on the rock to eat the berries, or break a chunk off his loaf, the little man's hand flashed out, long-fingered and deft it was, and snatched up the cheese and took a mouthful before setting it back. Soon Tam would reach for the cheese and set the loaf down instead. Then the little man would grab the loaf. Tam was still telling his story, plainly unaware of how fast his lunch was vanishing. Saskia could not help smothering a giggle as she waited for him to notice. At last he did, breaking off his tail as he blinked down at the mere scrap of cheese he was holding. Here, did I eat all that already? Where's the rest of my bread? It's the little man, she told him, gasping with mingled laughter and bewilderment. Why'd you let him nobble it? Tam looked quickly where she pointed, looked all around, then back at her, flushing a little. Do you take me for a fool, then? Nobody there. The laughter died out of her. Defensive, half frightened, she pointed again. That little man. He took a bite. Every time you put a thing down. Made a good meal, he did. She stared at the little man, who was still there, but staring wide-eyed at her now. Can't you see him? Right beside you. Tam looked hard at the spot, made a sudden swooping grab, but missed by a hand's length. The little man was gone in a flash, diving for the moorberry bush, stopping to peer back at Saskia with one astonished, terrified glare, then scuttling out of sight among the leaves. In a moment a meadowlark shot out of the bush and flew away over the moor. He's gone, Saskia said. She had Tam's full attention. I saw a bird fly. She started to nod, then stopped in the confusion. She'd had an idea the bird was the little man, but now she thought of it, that was nonsense. She hurried to look behind the bush, and came slowly back. Don't see him now. I never saw nobody, just that bird, Tam said. She stared at him, half indignant. Well, he was right there, eating your midday. Where's your bread and cheese, if you don't believe me? I believe you, Tam said gently. I reckon you saw him for true. Bread and cheese both gone, right enough. Afore I got more'n half. I'll lay it was funny to watch, he added good-naturedly as Saskia struggled with a grin. I only wish I'd seen him. Or could have caught him. Caught him? The idea wiped the grin away. What would you have done to him? Hadn't but looked him over. He'd have taken no harm from me. I don't grudge a bit of bread. He eyed Saskia speculatively. I'll tell you something. Could have been one of them ones. Them ones? You mean more folk? Heart thudding, she searched his face, feeling torn between excitement and alarm. You're making up tales now just to plague me. I'm not. Other folks have spied such creatures. I've heard tell 'em it. Likely heard that rattlehead Mickle goin' on about his pixie. Saskia swallowed hard, trying to sort out her emotions. If there's more folk about here. But they'd never let him see 'em. Or me either, she added reluctantly. Why not? Why should they? Never show theirselves at all, do they, less'n they want a favour done? Or if a body's done 'em a good turn already? That's what I've always heard. You did the little man a good turn, keeping your mouth shut, Tam laughed, and after a moment she laughed too. Here then, he added curiously, what'd he look like? She was beginning to believe Tam had truly seen nobody but the bird. Looked freaky odd, she admitted, but the phrase made her frown. I don't know. Come on, coaxed Tam. He was little. How little? No taller than my shoulder, seemed so anywise. Dark complected like a gypsy, but his beard and bits of hair near as light as flax. Tow. Brown eyes then, or blue? That flummoxed. Not blue, she was sure of that. Or rightly brown either, she added less certainly. More, well, greeny lavender. She met a startled gaze from Tam and said hastily, I don't know, they changed like. Tam was silent, sitting still as a rock, looking at her with an expression she could not read. He seemed stunned, dead serious all at once, almost sad. Thinks I'm gulling him, she thought, taking him for a fool. Anxiously she explained, seemed to me they changed anywise. Likely they didn't, though. After a moment Tam smiled. It seemed an effort, but the odd expression began to fade. I reckon they could have changed colours, or anything else, if 'twas folk creature. Well, I didn't mark his eyes special, only the gypsy skin and fair hair. Or maybe 'twas grey. You reckon it was a gypsy? An old one, runty? A gypsy'd swipe your cheese, rightly enough. Gypsies haven't come through Torskal yet this year. Might have come today, and they're all thieving rascals, my dad says. Aye, maybe. But I never run across one I couldn't see. Saskia made no comment. She had seen him. Seen his odd-coloured eyes, the hole in his cap. Tam simply hadn't been looking. Or maybe it was like the runes, which she could see and old Bess could not. There was no explaining some things, no sense trying, but it was hard to believe that she had caught a glimpse of one of the moorfolk. Everybody knew you had to be special some way to do that, and if she was, she couldn't think how. Abruptly she stood up, ending the subject. I'm away to my tasks now. I'm fearful late. She was already on her swift way down the slope as Tam called after her in his normal, cheerful voice, Come back tomorrow and bring your pipes. Just 1 week later, the gypsies came to Torskal. Arriving at mid-morning, an excitement of decorated hooded wagons and long-maned horses, dark-eyed men and women, and their tangle-haired, light-fingered children, all jingling with bells and hung with tattered bright ribbons and offering everything from tin-mending and copperwork to reading the future in a body's palm. For a few hours they were all over the village, bartering whatever they had for flour and honey and dried peas, hanks of wool for bladders of lard. Several went to old Bess for herbs and simples, all with ailing little ones. The children, gypsy and villager, ran shrieking from one end of the street to the other, or taught one another dances and games. By mid-afternoon the wagons were leaving, winding up the moor beyond old Bess's cottage on the track of the town some leagues away. Saskia missed the whole entrancing spectacle, or nearly the whole. However, she saw and heard a few odd things herself that morning, one of them stranger than gypsies, and a deal more unsettling. The morning began with a bit of good luck that nevertheless threw this day out of a kilter from milking time on. The milking itself went well. She emptied her pail into the churn, then refilled it with water and lugged it into the long back garden, while Anwara took the larger bucket to the well. They needed much water lately. It was redding time for the flax. Yano had cut the crop some days before, and Anwara had combed out the linseeds for old Bess to make into poultices and calf brew. Now the stalks lay spread in a sun-warmed, water-filled stone trough beside the garden, soaking to loosen the hidden fibers from their woody bark. Saskia replenished their bath, shook her wooden pail to get the last drops, then stood looking about at the morning and sniffing the rosemary-scented air. The rosemary grew at the farthest end of the garden near Yano's bee skeps, for the bees loved it too. As Saskia glanced their way, her attention sharpened. Just there, by the big skep, a small dark, vibrating cloud, growing larger every second, was hanging outside the slit door. As she watched, the cloud rose. A stream of bees streaked out of the hive and began to trace great circles in the air. At last, near a month after the other two, the bees in the big hive were swarming. Yano must be told, and told quickly, so he could drop everything to get the new skep ready. What luck, thought Saskia, as she sped back down the garden, still clinging to her pail, leaping over the carrot rows and little cabbages with great luck that she chanced to be there, to see which direction they flew. She could follow the swarm, mark where it settled, and keep watch till Yano had exchanged the new skep for the old, and scented it temptingly with herbs, and come to capture his bees again. They had worked together so out of their years. It was a kind of game hard won but exciting. "Dad, Dad!" she yelled, before he could possibly have heard her over the noise he was marking at the anvil. A glance over her shoulder showed her the great circles drawing in, the stream of bees thickening into a mass. They would be off in another instant. "Dad!" she shrieked, plunging around the corner of the cottage, still scanning the air over the hatch. Yano thrust an alarmed face out of the smithy doorway just as she caught a sight of the telltale dark little cloud bobbing away through the sunny morning. Saskia pointed, still yelling, and was already on her way, as Yano cried, "Keep 'em in your eye! Drum on the pail! I'll find you, never fear!" By then Saskia was cutting through the sward in Eva's garden, sidestepping the cabbages by instinct. Keeping her gaze still fast on the swarm, it flew erratically, soaring till it was no more than fist size, then dropping and recoiling and side-slipping in a slow, searching flight, but heading all the same for the wood. She was dodging thickets and scrambling over the roots, the pail stuck banging against her legs. By the time the wavering bee cloud, beginning now to contract into a pulsing clot, dipped below the nearest tree-top and disappeared, the deep humming guided her to the spot where the swarm had come to rest. It hung now from a branch like a quivering, oversized plum, to await the mysterious signal that would guide its flight to a new home. Yano, who might have been a bee himself, so wise he was in their ways, had told her that scouts flew out to search for a likely place and brought word back, though he took care to get there first. Meanwhile, Saskia knew what to do. No swarm would move off during rain or thunder. Yano had taught her so. It was why she had brought the pail. She found a stick and begun to beat her thunder drum, scanning the nearby tree trunks for the fungus everyone called puka furs. She was still beating the pail a quarter hour later when Yano came thrashing through the underbrush, bringing a saw and a wet cloth sack and the wood-handled iron scoop he used as a smoker. For a while they were busy, Saskia setting the crumbled fungus alight in the scoop and waiting for the smoke back and forth under the massed bees to lull and pacify them while Yano sawed off and trimmed a longish branch. When it was ready, he flung the sack deftly over the swarm, pulled the drawstrings, and thrust his pole through the knot. Then he ran for home. Saskia, staggering under the awkward burdens of pail, scoop, and saw, stumbled after him. By the time she joined him at the end of the garden, he had freed his captives and stood watching. Smoke-drowsy bees were everywhere, bumbling into one another, but never straying far from the big, heavy-looking queen, who crouched sleepily on the landing shelf of the new skep, while half a dozen regular-sized bees darted in and out of the slit door, making sure the place was done up to suit her pernickety highness. Yano grumbled, as if he didn't know more about skep building than they about honey. Soon enough they stayed inside, and the queen crawled through the slit door after them. Instantly the whole swarm followed in a swift, dark stream. In another minute not a bee could be seen. "There now," gasped Saskia, letting her breath out and dropping her burdens with a clank. "Safe and settled for another 12-month," Yano said with satisfaction, as they stood sagging after their strenuous efforts. Anwara appeared around the corner of the house, shaded her eyes, then came hurrying, holding up her skirts. "So that's where you both made off to. Got 'em all, did you?" "We did, and a good job we made of it, eh, daughter?" Saskia nodded. They exchanged a glance of satisfaction. Yano tossed the cut branch onto the woodpile, all because the little one here came screeching for me and kept an eye on where they went. Saskia, flexing her stiff fingers, swelled a bit at the praise. Yano was smiling with none of the brooding perplexity that often shadowed his eyes when he looked at her. "Well, I did wonder," remarked Anwara, "when I came from the well and saw the milk still there in the churn and Ma still in the byre." That brought Saskia down to earth. A glance at the sun confirmed it. She was late with everything, but Yana was feeling expensive. Now, wife, might it be you could churn the butter this one day? Take the cow, little one, and be off with you. You earned a bit of play. So that was the best luck of all, and Saskia lost no time getting Maul to her pasture and herself the bagpipes to the moor. Tam and the goats were not in sight. Saskia dropped down on a mossy rock near the favourite thorn bushes, glad enough to rest her legs after the climb and soak up the warm June sunshine. The air smelled spicily of the marigolds, strutting the nearby bog. The tall spires of pink foxgloves leaned there too, schooled by the winds to cant ever eastward, but propping each other up. Mixed with them were the purply red thistles that the goats preferred even to thorns. The fancy of the goats for prickly things was a right caution, Saskia told herself, and it was what Anwara always said of taste she did not understand, but it made certain that this was a good place to wait for Tam. After a bit, she slid off her rock, swung her pipes around the front of her, tucked the bag under her arm, popped herself breathless to fill it, and began to pace a few steps this way, a few steps that, to play on the summer air. First came a thistle and thorn tune all full of quick, sharp notes, then a softer marigold melody, then a queer old song she knew about the sun which always sounded eerie-like even to her and made her shiver. She cheered herself up with a thrumming, buzzing bee-song, and that was enough piping for a while. She let the bag collapse with a dying yowl and stretched out her mossy rock to get her breath. The day was warm, windless, and still as peace itself, except for bird-song. She drifted effortlessly to sleep. It was the bag moving stealthily under her loosely flung arm that woke her. Instinctively she clutched at it, blinked the world into focus, and sat upright, hugging bag and pipes as she gazed wide-eyed at what first seemed a dozen spindling little red cat children gathering round her neck. But they were not children. Wiry, thin they were, with clever little faces older than her own. One of them had a long-fingered hand still on her precious bag, tugging slyly at it. She twisted it away from him. "Where are you about? Let be!" she cried. They all went still as rooted things, their eyes wary, their odd little forms seeming to waver and go transparent like objects seen across an open flame, though she could still see them plain enough. There were only 5 of them after all. One of them surely the same bearded mannequin who had nobbled Tam's lunch, the others younger, their pale hair floating from beneath their scarlet caps. It was hard to tell man from maid. They were all clad alike in an earthly, shifting green that blended like lizard skin with the moor around them. One of the striplings still had a hand on her bagpipes. Again Saskia jerked them away. "There, didn't I tell you?" muttered the greybeard, not to her, but she heard him, right enough. "Tell him what?" she demanded. 5 pairs of smoky green eyes focused on her so intensely she could almost feel their beams. Belatedly she realized she had spoken in some language she did not know, but it was plain what he meant, from the way he said it. He asked her something in the same strange tongue. This time it was gibberish. When she only shrugged, he repeated it in ordinary human speech. "I said, do you understand our talk?" No, she threw a quick warning scowl at the stripling, whose hand again was creeping toward the bag. "You can see us, though," the greybeard commented. "That's what I told him. Saw me the other day, and you can see us now." "I can," she replied. Gathering her courage, she added, "Are you more folk?" He ignored the question, instead demanding, "Which eye you see us out of?" She knew better than to answer that. She'd heard tales of the folk and their tricks. Whichever eye she told him, he'd strike that eye blind. And for certain she wasn't about to say both. "Got eyes in the top of me head, like," she retorted, staring him down. To her surprise, he suddenly grinned, and his own eyes went bright lavender. All the eyes turned lavender. A ripple of laughter went about the group. They began to chatter in their language, heads together, glancing at her from time to time, their expressions shifting from curious to wary to speculative, their eyes from lavender to green to dark. She caught words she thought she had heard before. They surfaced here and there unexpectedly, like trout in a stream, lost again in an instant. There was one that sounded a clear note in her mind, a little bell with so familiar a ring that it set her chasing through her memory quite in vain. The word was Mockle, and she found no meaning for it at all. The bag stirred stealthily in her loosened grasp, and she snatched it to safety, the word flying out of her mind. "Let be, you sneak fingers," she snapped at the troublemaker, who merely grinned a little and kept his gaze on her face and his long fingers ready. "How is't you know our tunes?" he asked her. "They're my tunes. I make 'em up. Not the sun song, not the others either. Hey, I heard you piping. Know 'em all you do. They're ours. Who says? Retorted Saskia. Tinqua, he told her softly. Again the little bell sounded in her mind, clear and somehow frightening, she had no idea why. Be off with you now, she yelled at him, tears starting to her eyes. All of you leave me be. Abruptly she scrambled down from the rock, hugging her bagpipes tight, scattering little people. She shrieked after them until all the five, last of all the trouble-making stripling, had darted away across the bog or flown skyward, looking for all the world like crows. When she was sure they were gone, she sank down again on her boulder, breathing hard, struggling with confused feelings and longing for Tam to come. Instead, she heard a rasping, ragged voice behind her and whirled around to see Bruin and the tinker raise his untidy head from behind an outcrop. Told you, didn't I? They'll have 'em yet, those pipes of yourn. They never give up. You saw 'em too? She gasped, astonished but in a way relieved. If Bruin could see them, for certain she'd not gone queer in the head. Saw 'em creep up on you when you was sleeping. With such difficulty that she wished she dared to help him. Bruman struggled to his feet and stood a moment, panting, braced between the outcrop and his crutch, the grooves in his cheeks deepening in a slightly mocking smile. They was after them pipes. I knew they would be. Oh, I've heard about their tricks, I have. Then you woke up and ping they was gone. But you kept on talking like they was there. Slowly he hitched himself toward her. You can see 'em right enough. Here, which way they go? I don't know, Saskia said. She backed away. Ever which way, I paid no mind. Must have seen something. Saw him scatter. What's it to you, anyways? She edged away. This time he merely stood, swaying a bit, the smile fading. He seemed to have forgotten her. Doubtless he was as drunken as he could manage. For certain it didn't make him merry. Wished I knew where they go, he said, as if to himself. He half turned to hobble away, but then hesitated. If you see next time, come tell me, here? Likely won't be a next time, Saskia said with a shrug. He gave a brief, sour chuckle. Aye, that there will be, Bantling. Again he turned, settled his crutch more firmly under his arm, and this time did not glance back. Saskia slung her pipes to her shoulder and ran in the opposite direction. At the top of the next rise she paused to look back. The tinker was making a slow, uneasy, unsteady way toward the path that led down toward Moorwater. Pity him she might, but she could not like him or his spying. However, she meant to keep the matter to himself, or Yana would be again about a stubborn young one who would go on to the moor, come doom, come devil, however her elders warned her. The morning, which had started so well, was going all awry. Giving a hitch to the bagpipes, Saskia plodded and upward, almost wishing she had stayed in the cottage to churn. Bruman's taunting chafed her. It was wounding to find out that the folk, far from thinking her special, only wanted her bagpipes, and dismaying to think they might keep at it, and at it, until she no longer dared to come here. No better than the Torskell young ones, they were ragging her and claiming her tunes were theirs, the way the children claimed firewood, and trying their plaguey tricks. She found Tam just over the brow of the rise, stalking in her direction, hustling the goats ahead of him with a free use of his stick, and looking as cross as she felt. There you are, then, she greeted him, as if the morning were all his fault. I've been waiting and waiting. That's Bruman's doing, none of mine, he said shortly. You see him anywheres by ill luck or worse chance? She saw now that he was more than cross, and he was troubled. She nodded. He's halfway to the Moorwater by this time. What's he done? Left the pony untied. Took me a 3-league tramp to find her this morning, and she'd got her right before it stuck in the rabbit hole, limping now. And last night I caught him kicking old Warrior out in his way, kicking him hard. I told him, one more time you do that, just do it one more time. Tam was angrier than Saskia had ever seen him. Indeed, she had never seen him angry at all, only vexed, sometimes, at one of the goats who wouldn't mind, or at some other of the Bruman's ways. What would you do to him? She ventured. Leave him. Tam's chin jutted. He gave a swing to his stick that beheaded several daisies. Might have done it afore this, but for the animals. Never could figure out what to do about them, or him either now. He swung the stick again, but absently, and his scowl was easing. He gave her a flick of a smile. If he's gone for the day, good riddance. Maybe he'll get too sozzled to find his way home. Where'd you see him? Down by the thorn bushes. He was spying on me. Spying? Tam's brow snapped together again. What for? 'Twasn't only me he was watching, or only him that saw. Saskia chewed her lip a moment, hesitant to talk about her other encounter. She did not know why. This a riddle, then. Tam inquired, with a tinge of leftover exasperation. So Saskia told him about that too, omitting her daft idea that she'd heard one of the two of the folkish words before. By now she couldn't call them to mind. "The folk are after your dad's pipes," Tam exclaimed, wide-eyed. "Bruman said they would be. Old sly boots, how do you know?" "Here, you're not going to tell me he saw 'em too." "He did at first. Likely they didn't know he was there. He said I woke up and ping they was gone." "They did go all wavery like," Saskia admitted. "Same as the one that nobbled your bread and cheese." Tam nodded slowly. "You can see 'em anyhow, but him and me can't, less'n they let us." He burst out. "'Twas my doing, that was. Him spying on you. I went and told him about that little man. Now I'll lay he wants you to watch where they go." "He does. I don't know why." Tam heaved a sigh. Glancing toward the goats, he had found a moorberry bush thorny enough to suit him. He flung himself down on a grassy hillock. "Bruman's got some rattle-hadden notion about nicking some of that fairy med he's heard tell of. Barrels and barrels of it stored somewheres down where the folk live. Makes you young again, sets you a-dancin', so he says." Saskia dropped down beside him, staring. "Gone naughty, has he?" "No tellin'." Tam gazed off across the moor, his shoulders drooping. "You wouldn't credit it, but he used to be a good enough fella. Good to me he was, bit rough, but who cares for that? I learned to give him his own back. Once I got some size on me. Fine leather, oh wizardly. We'd go to all the fairs." He broke off with a shrug. "Now look at him. I'd leave him tomorrow, but what'd become of the old gawk? Hurts I'm fierce to ride in that cart. And lor, if we have to winter here, he'll freeze solid. Anyways, I like to keep moving, I do." Sasko had almost forgotten her own troubles listening to Tam's naughtier ones, and trying to visualize the life he sometimes gave her glimpses of. "Where'd they go, if you'd left them?" "What'd you do?" she asked him. "Oh, then," Tam's eyes brightened and his grin spread like the sun coming out, showing the little gap between his two teeth. "Then I'd go gypsying down to the Kingstown and all around to the fairs and the holy day doings, I would, and play me flutes and juggle and pass me cap and live like a lord without nobody to plague me but myself." Steve listened entranced, seeing the world open out into a place of unimaginable variety, unaccountable sights and sounds. "Could I come too?" she cried. "You could." Tam seized on the idea instantly. "We'd play our tunes together, you on your pipes and me on me flute. The city gulls be filling our hats with coppers, you'd see if they wouldn't. And when the snow flew, we'd go on southwards to Longseat, where it's warm all the year." He went on for some time, spinning the tale and inventing answers to Saskia's questions, each answer more fantastic than the last, until they were both laughing and Bruman seemed no more a buzzing fly to brush off and be done with. But soon enough Saskia came back to earth, looked about her at the familiar sweep of the highland, the ever-present clouds gathering on the horizon, and said, "Wouldn't we ever come back to the moor, then?" Tam smiled and said, "Whenever we'd a fancy to. Come on, the goats are straying." An hour or so later Saskia wandered back down to the village, only to see the first gypsy wagons beginning to leave it. She halted with a cry of anguished disappointment, then hurled herself down to the last steep path beside the apple orchard, leaped goat-like into the street, and fled along it to the cottage. She flung open the half-door and shot in, stumbling over one of the hens, and all but going head over heels in her effort not to damage her precious bagpipes. "God's mercy, what has the child done now?" shrieked Anwara, reaching hastily to save her bread dough. "Isn't a black boggart after you?" "I've done nothing but nothing," Saskia protested breathlessly. "Fell over that addle-plate chicken. It's the gypsies. They're leaving." He raced toward that well, and the green around it that might have been Ragged Edge Market Square had the village been big enough to hold a market. It was to the market in the town that the gypsies were headed, and a few coppers more in their pockets always made a stop in Torska welcome. The colorful turmoil of the noise and activity filled the trampled open space around the well as the water fills a bowl. Dust rose, harness jingled as the gypsy men backed their horses between the shafts of the gaily decorated wagons. The women stowed away unsold trinkets and yelled to their children, most of whom were still racketing up and down the street with the village young ones. A mixed dozen circled in a clapping ring dance. Saskia ran up to join it, but was pushed away at once by the miller's son Jenkin, who cried, "Not you," and his sister Bretla laughed, echoed, "Not you," and broke out of the ring to push her too. Ebba's daughters joined the new game, as did several others. In an instant, Saskia found herself in the middle of a jostling, shrieking mob, whose laughter turned to jeering, whose mauling grew rougher, wilder, more painful, until her breath was knocked out of her, and she felt as if she got tangled up in the mill wheel. A large, thin hand reached in and pulled her out of the melee, held her tight against a comfortingly solid body in voluminous skirts, while a woman's voice berated her tormentors in an incomprehensible language. They backed away, scattered. The gypsy children, who had formed a part of the ring game, but not of the mob, stared a moment at Saskia, still gulping for her breath, and drifted toward the wagons, her chest heaving. Saskia twisted to look up into the dark, stern face of a gypsy woman, who released her but steadied her a moment and straightened her clothing, that said, "Hurt? You?" Saskia shook her head. Though one cheekbone felt larger than the other, she had a bite, her tongue bloody, and both arms throbbed. She managed to gasp out her thanks. The woman smiled faintly, nodded, and gave a final twitch to Saskia's apron. She was a tall, handsome woman, older than Amwara, but not as old as old Bess. With a scarlet kerchief half covering her most smooth black hair, Saskia's gaze clung gratefully to her. "Go play now," said the woman, but she did not seem surprised when Saskia cast a darkling glance after her retreating tormentors and shook her head again, decisively. "Buy ribbon? Bangle?" the gypsy suggested, gesturing toward a nearby hooded wagon, though it was plain she did not expect to make a sale. Saskia, however, grasped at a missed opportunity. "Will you read my hand?" she ventured. She thrust out a palm to show what she meant, reaching with the other into her apron pocket to offer the lump of beeswax. The woman laughed, nodded, took the beeswax, and led Saskia to the wagon, where an old man and a young one were preparing to hitch up. There was a low stool beside the wagon steps. Saskia guessed that the woman had been sitting there when the mobbing began. She resumed her seat and took Saskia's hand, turning it palm up. Good fortune already, huh? No hurt," she said teasingly, and bent her head over the spread palm. At once her black eyebrows drew together. For a moment she went still as a rock, her grasp tightening until it felt to Saskia as if an eagle's claw held her. Was it to be a bad fortune, then? Abruptly the gypsy released her. Slowly she raised her eyes to scan Saskia's face with a strange expression, grave, alert, a little pitying. With her left hand she made a curious gesture in the air between the two of them, then ducked her dark, proud head in what almost seemed a hint of a bow. Reaching into her pocket, she produced the lump of beeswax and held it out to Saskia, whose eyes swam with sudden tears of disappointment, of simple hurt. Pride drove the tears back and fought the quaver in her voice. "Will you not do it, then?" she asked. "Cannot," the gypsy told her. "Is it not enough, the wax?" Saskia said on a sudden thought. She rummaged in her pocket again and found a silverweed root she had meant for old Bess, who liked the red dye it made. "Will you have this too?" "Na, na, 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 little one." The woman's strong, thin, brown hands gently pushed away the offering. "I try read hand. Cannot." She met Saskia's baffled glance for a moment, then suddenly reached down and scratched a few symbols in the dirt with one long finger. "You read," she told Saskia. They looked like nothing Saskia had ever laid eyes on. Not like runes, not like the words she was learning from old Bess. Was it gypsy talk? "But I don't speak your tongue," she objected. The woman nodded gravely, once again taking Saskia's hand, and this time pointing to the palm. "I don't speak," she said. She smiled, rose, picked up her stool, and moved to the wagon steps, glancing toward the two men who were buckling the last of the harness over their team, then back at Saskia. "I wish for you very good fortune." She hesitated, her smile fading. "But beware." Again she gave the slight formal duck of her kerchief head, and murmured, "Jad Velza," and disappeared into the wagon. The younger man strode back, called something to her in the gypsy tongue, hoisted the wooden steps in after her, and slammed the door. A moment later the wagon was rattling after the others along the steep track that led past old Bess's cottage and up over the moor toward the town. Saskia stood watching the cloud of dust slowly settle, the first wagons appear at the crest of the rise as shapes against the sky. Then with dread she looked down at her spread palms. They looked as they had always looked, smooth and pale brown, with a fine crease encircling each thumb and wavery line, rippled like a tiny brook, crossing under the fingers. That was all there was to see. Saskia swallowed, hid both hands under her apron, She had never looked closely at anybody else's palms. But there must be something freaky odd about hers. After a moment, she headed up the street in the wake of the wagons. Their dust still tickled her nostrils when she knocked on old Bess's door in the calm, "Come in, Saskia." Old Bess always knew her knock, lifted the latch. The old woman was moving about her single room, putting away her little clay pots of unguents, resealing a cow's horn that held some tincture or other, gathering some dried roots into a wooden box. "I have been dosing the gypsies," she remarked. "They have cures aplenty of their own, but they like to learn of mine, too." She glanced at Saskia with her brief, one-sided smile, and then her eyes sharpened. "And what ails you?" "Nothing," Saskia said quickly. She pulled the silverweed root from her pocket. "I brought you this." "My, thanks." Old Bess accepted the root, still eyeing her. "You been on the moor, then? Missed all the hubbub and fairy? And you wanted your fortune read?" "'Twas no matter." Saskia shied away from the subject, grasped at another one. "The bee swarmed right after milking the last hive. Me and Dad caught 'em, though." Old Bess was silent a moment, then sat down on her hearth-stool and drew Saskia to her. "And how come your cheek is bruised and swelling? Was that a bee?" For an instant Saskia thought of inventing some mishap, but nobody coaxed old Bess. Tried to join the circle game, with the gypsy young-uns and others. But Jenkin and Bretla, well, all of 'em, she broke off. A gypsy woman made 'em stop. If old Bess had nothing useful to say, she held her peace as now. She gazed at Saskia and for a moment thought of her own thoughts, which were unreadable on her face. Then she sighed, reached for one of the little pots still out, took out the rag stopper, then smeared a thin coating of some unguent over Saskia's cheek. It immediately felt cooler. "It's well already," Saskia told her. Old Bess smiled briefly and said it would be soon. "I treated a dozen worse ones today, and bound up broken arm." "The gypsy young ones play rough, too, with one another," she remarked, "and never heed my advice. One little lad should have been at his cot, not larking about with our village imps. Burning with fever he was. Have you other such bruises?" Saskia shook her head, idly took one of old Bess's hands and managed a swift look at one palm. At first she was startled. It was a perfect network of fine creases, the deep one curving around the thumb like a richly branched vine, others slanting crosswise up and down. There were many more lines that marked her own palm, but her surprise quickly faded. There were also more lines in old Bess's face than in most people's. The puzzle was still a puzzle. Now the gypsy was not here to ask. Disconsolately, she wandered toward the shelf holding the books. "Will you tell me some new words?" she asked. "I will. Bring a book and your piece of slate." And for an hour, the uneasy subjects of bruised and palms were put aside, if not quite out of either mind, and the gypsy wagons trailed into a memory. Then Saskia went home. It was not to be hoped that Amara would fail to notice the swollen bruises darkening her daughter's left cheek, or, having noticed, would fail to speak her mind. "There now, didn't I bid you stay clear of those gypsies? They play too rough for a little half-farthing like you. No more heft to you than a sparrow," Anwar sputtered on, turning Saskia this way and that, probing for other hurts, her hand as gentle as her scolding was harsh. "Where else did they hurt you?" "Nowhere, Mamma." Saskia squirmed away as the soreness awakened her arms and shoulders in spite of Anwar's care. "'Twasn't the gypsies anyway. 'Twas the others." Anwar's hand stilled. "What others?" Belatedly, Saskia wished she had held her tongue. "I don't know," she mumbled. "No one." No use. Anwar soon had it out for her. Jenkin, Bretla, Robin, Herowick, Anika, Alana, Oren, also Morgan and Aluna and her own cousins. "They were always at me, Mama. I don't heed 'em." "I'll heed 'em," Anwar said, slowly straightening and staring first at her own tensely folded hands and then in the direction of Eva's house. She did not seem really surprised, more as if something she dreaded had begun to happen, and whatever she did about it would only cause wrangling or worse. "'Twon't stop 'em, Mama," Saskia argued. "They'll just pay me out for it next time." "It's so sure," Anwar said slowly. "There'll be a next time?" "Nay, likely they'll forget it if I stay out of their eye for a spell." Saskia reached for the egg basket and escaped before Anwar could think of more questions. She hoped Yana would not come to hear it. Least said, soonest mended. In truth, she'd brought it on her own head, trying to join their game. Should have known better, she told herself. Whether on Wara and Yano the straight of it, Saskia never learned, but not to give Ebba a tongue-lashing was asking too much of her. She came home flushed and with satisfaction, remarking if Morgan and Aluna didn't hear of it on their own backsides, she'd be astonished. No doubt they did. Ebba might turn a blind eye to their bully-ragging, but not their getting caught out. Naturally, the next time Saskia encountered the twins, they pushed her into the mud outside the cow byre and pelted her with clods. That seemed the end of it to her relief. Her bruises faded. As inconspicuously as possible, she drove Moll to the pasture each morning, and escaped to the moor. 10 long June days passed in their accustomed way. "15. On the 11th morning after the gypsies departed, Gwyn the Miller's Jenkins staggered home midway through the sheep washing in the dammed-up brook, shivering and sneezing, with a head full of red-hot stones, so he told his mother, Berinda, and Berinda reported to the good wives at the well. He took to his cot, and by evening was burning with fever. During the night, his sister Bretla awoke with a headache and shivering, unable to bear the morning sun in her eyes when it was time to gather wood, nor could Catilla's boy Herrick, and by midday Guthwick and Farron's Anika and her 2 younger brothers were ill as well. Child after child succumbed. Within 3 days there was scarce a house that had at least one child abed, and at Gwyn the Miller's there were 8, and the 2 oldest having shared freely with all the rest. To the good wives, distractedly performing their young ones' tasks as well as their own, one suspicious fact soon became obvious. Aside from a few babes in their arms, the only child in Torskell, still well and active, was the blacksmith's Saski. "Oh, I'm not surprised," declared Helsa, who, being childless herself, had leisure to gossip at all the village doors. "Have you heard tell ever of one of them ones fallen ill? It'll be wonderful if that creature weren't at the root of it somehow. You mind that bit of teasing the day the gypsies hereabouts? 'Twas Jenkin and Bretla begun it, and 'twas them 2 first taken sick. Clear as the day she put a curse on 'em. God's mercy, woman, can you do naught but call like an old crow?" interrupted old Bess, appearing suddenly from inside the house where she had been dosing Gwyneth's Harilla. "Of course it was. 'Twas a gypsy boy's, and none of Saski's. A lad I treated that day had a fever like all these, and mixing with the rest, however, I warned him. I dare say half those gypsy young ones have been speckled as a fieldfare's egg for se'night. Jenkin'll come out in spots by morning, you'll see. Bretla next." "The pox?" gasped Gwyneth, blanching and clutching at the door-frame. "The rosy pox only, not the bad one," old Bess told her, adding impatiently, "I dosed you for the same when you were a little lass, can't you remember? It's all be over afore Midsummer's Eve." She brushed past and strode on down the street to see Catilla's Herrick, but Helsa, enraged at the snub from one she dared not defy to her face, snapped, "Gypsy boy, indeed! Why, the gypsies were gone a fortnight before Jenkins sinkened." Gwyneth stared at her a moment, then whispered, "That's true, so 'twas that. That changeling, payin' out all our young ones because of you, played a bit rough. Should have been thrown into the fire to begin with," Helsa whispered back. "It'll be the cops she'll put a blight on next, or do the sheep a mischief. Oh, God forbid." Fresh alarm drove every other consideration from Gwyneth's mind, and our lambs to so scant this late this year. Could she have done so already? Ah, what will Adilden say? Helsa advised her to warn Adilden at once. Adilden, who had found one of his oxen gimpy that morning, passed on his own alarm to his near neighbour, young Hungus. And Hungus, whose boy was still sick abed, had to leave off hay and a fetch to his new heifer from the pasture, lest she be overlooked by that creature, and unjustly berated his wife for not thinking of it first. All the husbands were short-tempered and bone-weary from eating cold food and having no help with the chores. In the long dusk that evening, the liquid comfort dispensed at Sorcha the alewife's cottage only fanned the flames. By morning, when Jenkin and Bretla broke out with spots just as old Bess had predicted, the attention of the village men had already shifted from their offspring to their livelihoods, and their somewhat grumbling worry turned to deep-seated fear. The fear focused overnight on the blacksmith's household, and the changeling harbored there to the endangerment of all. The blacksmith's household had seen it coming. At the earliest rumor of curses, Anwara, hurrying in from the well one morning, set the bucket down so carelessly that water splashed her skirts. She seized Saskia by the shoulders. "Tell me straight out now, daughter," she said grimly. "Did you call down a curse on those young ones who savaged you, each meaning no real harm, did you?" "Nay, I did not then, mamma," Saskia stammered. "Mind, I wouldn't blame you," Anwara muttered, releasing her and turning bitterly to hang her shawl on its nail. "But how could I do so? I don't know how." Anwara studied her strangely, her expression a mixture of helplessness and pain. "They are all taken to their beds." "Taken to their beds, and the young ones, you know that," she said. As Saskia nodded, she added, "all but you." "Well, I'm seldom hailing." Nothing new about that. Instead of answering, Anwara trod over to fill the kettle, her steps dragging. "Stay away from him," she said. "Stay out of sight." Since she habitually tried to do so, Saskia held her peace. But a few days later, when Yano came in from his midday meal and called her to him, telling her heavily he'd been hearing she'd overlooked Gwen's Jenkin and Eva's twins, she was goaded into defending herself. "I've kept my eye on 'em true enough." "So would you if they did you a mischief whenever your back was turned. Keeping an eye on 'em's one thing, but overlooking's witchcraft," Yano said. "Well, what do I know of witchcraft?" Saskia was near to tears. "They're telling lies." There was not much new about that, either. But this was not the usual hubbub over trifles, and though Saskia took care to be more elusive than ever, it did not blow over. The pox itself ran its course in house after the rash appeared. Then a day or two after, the pathetic invalid turned back onto an ordinary working child, whose first complaint was silenced by worn-out parents. A sennight after the last rash vanished, the plague was a memory. Then Helsa went out to the byre one morning to milk her husband's 3 fine cows, and found one of them tangled in the chain ties, injured and dying, and in a twinkling Alun was no longer the richest man in Torskal, but only a 2-cow man, like many other. The 2-cow men and their families found it hard to be truly sorry about that, but all joined with Helsa in blaming the blacksmith's child. Nobody could prove that Saskia had been out of her cot that night, but nor could Yano or Anwara, silently remembering their night's wanderings, prove she had actually been in it, not at all night long. They'd been fast asleep like ordinary Christians, so how could they know, Helsa asked anybody who would listen, what mischief that creature might get up to in the dead of night? It was question without answer, and it sent undercurrents of fear and ill will roiling through the village. One pale summer evening, not long before Midsummer's Eve, a grim-faced little company of Yano's neighbors appeared at his cottage door. They would not come in. Instead, they asked that Yano come into the dooryard for his private word. Yano put aside the new beast-scap he was plaiting and stepped outside, but did not shut the door. Anwara, vigorously scrubbing out the iron pot with a handful of brushes, let her movements slow and go quiet. Saskia stopped sloshing out the mugs. They heard little but the rumble of voices until Eldilden, whose high-pitched tones carried, remarked righteously, "It's for the good of the village, for the health of the young ones, and our heart beasts." Yano was silent. "I'm told there's good enough smiths just over the moor, the next village," remarked Gwyn the miller. "I might try 'em." "Do then, if you care to walk a league," said Yano evenly. "But the child's done no harm, and so I'll tell you." "And so you may tell us till doomsday," said Alun. "We know it, we know. She must go back to where she come from, that's what we're saying. And where's that but here, then? Just turn her out, do I? A young one no taller than my elbow? Man, you're daft." Yano snapped at him. "I'll never do it." Gwyn's voice came again, ominous this time. "Then if you want blacksmiths, we'll have to deal with it ourselves." "You'll deal with me first," said Yano doggedly. "We will if we must," Gwyn told him. "We'll give till midsummers. That's time enough." Anwara and Saskia stood motionless. The footsteps faded up the street, and Yano came slowly back into the house. He and Anwara exchanged a long, expressionless glance. Saskia waited anxiously, looking from one to the other, swallowing hard but not daring, not really wanting to question outright. In the end, no one spoke. After a moment, all 3 went back to their tasks, avoiding one another's eyes. Part 4. Oops.